our agenda is we'll sort of review the fiction JOT progression, and then we'll look at some small group instruction. I've brought some data from some small groups. They're all, they're different small groups that are represented. You'll see at least 3 different small groups that'll be represented. You'll kind of look at their data. We'll talk about if this was your student data, what would you teach? And then I have video clips of what I taught with that group. And I think it's important to say that like there's no right or wrong answer. This is something we do that I've done a lot with teams. It's actually gotten easier in the digital space because it's easier to share what we actually taught and to share, especially reading data, because it's all kind of recorded now, which makes it a little easier to share. Before we had to kind of just describe it. So a little bit of background. I'll give you just a couple minutes to read these bullet points about sort of the background of the fiction JOT progression. Is everybody ready to go on?
Yep.
And so here's sort of some of the research behind what we did last time, thinking about whole group read aloud. So I'll give you some time to read this. Okay, we ready to go on?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so today we're going to be talking about small group instruction. So here's some background on the research behind this and why you might use, how small group instruction and whole group instruction, even with the same tool, might look a little different. Okay, are we ready? All right, so actually, before I go on to this, I'm going to drop in, hopefully this isn't view only. Changed. And I'll go ahead and drop the link for the fiction JOT progression into chat in case you want to have that open. But if you remember, there were 4 different areas that we were analyzing student work using the fiction JOT progression. We were analyzing within plot and setting, character, vocabulary and figurative language, and themes and ideas. So I put together some student work from each of these different areas. And like I said, they are from different groups. So here is the first. This was a vocabulary and figurative language question, was from a graphic novel series about spies, or well, children who are solving mysteries using spy equipment. One of the vocabulary terms that I really wanted to make sure they understood was what is invisible ink. And so you can see each of the students' different answers. And so based on their answers, what might you teach if this was your group and this is what how they responded?
And I think they're all on the right track. I mean, Alex is kind of telling you what the purpose of, but not really explaining what it is, where the other two are very similar answers.
Yeah, you've got two kids that they're all on the right track. This is a relatively easy one in that nobody's out in left field somewhere. But you do have two kids that are pretty much telling you what it is, and another kid who's talking about the how to actually use it. So I'll go ahead and show you. This is what I taught, and I want to make sure. So two of you said that it was a special message that you had to shine a light on in order to see. And then Alex, you said it was a hidden message, but why would someone use that? All right. So thinking about what we've seen in both presentations, how could you use the Saravallo fiction jot progression with students at your school?
So I think this is a really great formative assessment strategy because just like you modeled for us, you took students' responses and then used that as like your starting point for teaching. And so I think they serve as a really quick, easy starting place for teachers to be able to say like, okay, here's how a student is responding. And then teacher has to kind of quickly think like, what do I want to teach to? And then go based on that. Your last question is something I'd like to talk more about because I have personally noticed a big difference in when I'm modeling my thinking aloud and their jot notes, and then when they go to do them on their own. And I just think it takes a lot of time and practice for them to be getting to that deeper level of thinking independently.
Mm-hmm. So kind of thinking about that question about how would jots based on read aloud text differ from self-read text? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think you could kind of see with this group or really with all of the different groups, what they said when we were talking about them in the teach part was so much more informative than what they had written down. Even though these were all kids that they've been jotting for a while. You know, they're certainly not kids who hesitate to get started, but what they say is much more expansive than what they write.
I think having that writing there, though, helped them get their thoughts together to be able to have the discussion. Yeah. You could see where they were at, so you knew where to lead the discussion. And then through the discussion, they did more understanding and discovery and build their own comprehension through the discussion that you were facilitating using the progression notes.
Yeah, it kind of gives us an anchor for where to start our discussion. I will say some of these kids, I was very careful when I was gathering data to share in this presentation, because many of these kids will go back and revise their jots as we discussed. It's something that I've seen, so not all of the students do that, but many of them do. And so then I have to be like, when I'm preparing for something like this, I have to be real quick about when I'm snagging the image or we end up with the image that is
revised,
the revised information. But by the same token, it's great that they're doing that.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I said, well, if they I was thinking in my head if they're having through the conversation, being able to revise their own thinking and change their thinking, then that shows that the conversation was productive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the ultimate goal, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I think for my kids, this might be overwhelming for them at first. So we might break this down into steps and start with just the plot and setting. And then when I start teaching them about characters and slowly moving them through it, I could keep it color coded and then lead up to this by the end of the year. But just thinking about keeping it short. So for instance, if our goal for our read aloud is to talk about the characters, they could write in blue or on blue sticky notes who they think the characters are of the setting. And then since everybody already mentioned that the writing isn't the best representation of their verbal expression, we could do partner turn and talks on the carpet where they could then share their thinking with each other.
Yeah, it's really important to scaffold the tasks in different ways. I know one of the things I do, depending on certain texts and certain kids who are struggling with specific things, like my little friend Koa there, who was our example for character. His next book, he's having all blue Post-it notes. We're just going to track how that character is changing and feeling through the story. So he has 3 blue Post-it notes and a theme one at the end, and as opposed to all of those different levels. I know with Liba's group, I've been leaning heavily into plot because both she and Marco are a little fragile there. So it doesn't always have to hit all the different areas, depending on the scaffolds of the book. So to kind of close out, just wanted to have a resource spotlight. That you've got a link to the fiction jot progression there, and also a link to this same kind of work, but in nonfiction, because it looks a little different. We've only been able to talk in these sessions about the fiction, and the work is very similar, but does look a little different when it comes to nonfiction.